Tonnage and poundage. This is something that is traditionally, a tax that has been traditionally granted to the king. It's called tonnage and poundage because it's done by weight, by tons and pounds. It is a tax on imports and exports. Okay? It was considered a consistent, persistent source of revenue for the monarch. Parliament has decided that it is something that they have to grant the king the right to collect from time to time, that it's not just an automatic lifetime right. Charles fights with them over this. They say, no. He says, but I'm your absolute divine right monarch. And Parliament says, no. We will give it to you for a year. And Charles says, but I'm your divine right absolute monarch. And Parliament says, we'll give it to you for a year. The House of Lords looks at the Commons saying, we'll give it to you for a year, and the House of Lords says, this is an insult to the king. The king has always had this right granted to him by every parliament for his life. Charles doesn't want to get into a debate. He dissolves Parliament. And when we say dissolves Parliament, he says, you guys are done meeting, go home. And he takes the tonnage and poundage anyway, without the permission of Parliament. Okay? He needs the money. Remember Buckingham and Spain and being insulted and ticked off? So we end up in Cadiz, Spain. That first 300,000 pounds that Parliament had granted Charles had been spent retrofitting the Navy. And so Charles and Buckingham sent it to Spain to take down the Spanish fleet. They're supposed to be getting help from the Dutch. The Dutch have plenty of reason to want to see Spain suffering here. Do you remember how Spain treated the Spanish Netherlands? Sent them the wonderful, heartfelt gift of the Spanish Inquisition. Right? The Dutch have no love lost for the Spanish, and so they're happy to get in on what they envision as a winning fight. Now, the English ships that have been retrofitted are mostly merchant vessels. This means they're cargo ships, okay? We've loaded cannon and soldiers onto them, and we're sending them to Cadiz. Envision the difference between a battleship and an oil tanker. Which one would you want to go to war with? Because it's made for what you're using it for. Oil tanker, not going to do exactly what you need it to do. The captains are worried about their ships because they're not meant to be battle ships. Okay? So they decide they're going to let the Dutch do most of the fighting, and they're just going to use their ships to move the soldiers. The British land their troops, but the troops don't take food or water with them when they land. So it's not very long on the shore before they're very thirsty. So Sir Cecil, the commander on land, allows them to open up the casks of wine that are sitting on the piers. They disappear very quickly. It's amazing how quickly wine will evaporate in the hot Mediterranean climate. Wink, wink. The British soldiers are soon so drunk that they start shooting at each other. The ships have to come back in and pick them up. New plan, plan B. We're going to take the ships out off the coast of Spain, and we'll intercept the Spanish ships coming back from the New World loaded with gold and silver bullion. Yay. It's just as good, right? We don't have to fight, and we still get the wealth of the Spanish. Well, the Spanish have the ability to communicate, and their ships simply sail south, way south, circumvent the English-Dutch fleet, and sail completely unmolested into the port of Cadiz. In the meantime, all of these soldiers, who were only supposed to be on the ships long enough to sail down to Cadiz and then be put ashore and be fighting, have been hanging out on the ships that are not meant to house a whole bunch of soldiers, right? Imagine where you live. And imagine 6 times the number of people living in that same space. We're going to move 5 other families in with you. Yeah, what are living conditions going to be like in no time? right? Yeah. Well, in no time at all, the British soldiers and sailors are rife with disease and sickness. It's decided that they need to go home. They're so ill. Many of the soldiers will die on board on the way back to England, and more will die even after they've gotten back to England because they didn't send any word ahead. Hey, we're coming and we've got sick folks on board. Be ready with food, water, shelter. So they pull into port and everybody's like, okay. The whole expedition to Cadiz cost about 250,000 pounds. Tremendous success, right? Wrong. The whole mess is blamed on the Duke of Buckingham. The Duke of Buckingham. Charles is king now. Sport. Okay. So, Charles wants to continue the war quickly. He needs a victory to distract people from the mess that just happened. You guys ever watch the news and notice how fast subjects change? Yeah. Before Ebola arrived in Dallas, ISIS, right? Also the enterovirus D68 that's striking young children. It's a respiratory virus, paralyzing some of them. They don't know what causes it. They don't know how to treat it. They don't know why some kids get it and others don't, and why some are paralyzed and some aren't. That was all over the news. And then Ebola. Have you seen Up? Our news media is a little bit like Doug. Squirrel. Okay. So Charles needs a victory somewhere to squirrel the English people about Cadiz. All right? Are you with me? Okay. So how's he going to get that? Go to war somewhere else or re-engage Spain somewhere else, somehow else. So why doesn't he just turn around and do it? It's expensive, so he has to summon Parliament. He summons the Parliament of 1626. Now, he's had many vocal opponents in England, and he figures out a brilliant way to keep them from being his vocal opponents in Parliament. Before he summons the Parliament, he says, "You, Eliot, you, my little oppositional hemorrhoid, I make you sheriff of your county." Because a sheriff has to stay where they are and do their job. And so guess where you can't be? Causing me a pain in my hiney, my little hemorrhoid. Right? Got it? So Charles does this with all of his opponents. He makes them sheriffs so they can't come to Parliament to oppose him. Ha 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 ha! He's got them outsmarted, by golly. By the way, by 1626, when he's summoning this Parliament, Charles has managed to step in it again. He was trying to get France to go to war with Spain, with England. Okay? And France was reluctant, so Charles said, well, we have some extra ships here. How would you like to use them to join us in the war against Spain? And France, under Louis XIII, is like, oh, yeah, that's great. Sounds fantastic. Send them on over. So the ships are delivered to France. Louis gets them all set up, and then he uses them to attack the French Huguenots. What is England? England is, well, they are royally pissed, but England is Protestant, and France is Catholic. And so Protestant England just gave ships to Catholic France, which Catholic France used to attack its own Protestants. Do you smell that? That's the smell of failure. Charles is getting used to this scent by now. Okay. The House of Commons, in the meantime, has seen what Charles has done with the whole sheriff bit, and they found other leaders to oppose him. The House of Commons, when they convene, moves to impeach Buckingham. They think he's been a total mess. He's a disaster. He's providing bad advice to the king. A speech is given in Parliament which insults Buckingham. So Charles has his soldiers go into Parliament and arrest 2 members of Parliament and throw them in the Tower of London. Remember, Charles is a divine right absolute monarch, and he does what he wants. Except that there is specifically a law protecting speech in Parliament, which says no action can be taken against someone based on a speech that they give in Parliament. So Charles has done 2 things wrong. He imprisoned someone against the law, and he sent his soldiers into Parliament. Another colossal no-no. Charles is then forced to let the guys out of the Tower of London. Oh yeah, the smell of failure gets stronger. Then Charles tries to force Parliament to vote on taxation. The House of Commons refused. So Charles does what? Dismisses them again. Okay, think of a divine right absolute monarch. This guy thinks nobody is the boss of him. He has total control. This is you when you're 4 and you have friends over at your house. No. I said we're going to play school and I'm the teacher and you're going to do math. I don't want to do math. Then go home. It's my house. We do what I want. Charles is roughly the equivalent of a temper tantrum throwing 3 or 4-year-old here. Okay? He's in a store. He wants that toy. I want taxation! Give me my taxes! Give me my taxes! Give me my taxes! And Parliament says, no. No taxes for you. And he sends them home. Fine then. Go away. Okay. Now, why did Charles summon the Parliament of 1626? To get money. He dismissed them. Has he got money? No. Uh-oh. He's got no money, mo problems. Right? No. He's got 99 problems and Parliament's all of them. All right. So Charles devises another plan. He sends a letter out in July of 1626 telling his subjects to, quote, lovingly, freely, and voluntarily, end quote, give him money. Lovingly, freely, and voluntarily. Just send your pledges and donations right on in. Sarcastically? No, that is a quote. Lovingly, freely, and voluntarily give him money. Okay. I'm your king. I need money. Send it because you love me. Strangely enough, the money does not come pouring in. I know. So now Charles has got to call the guys, you know. Nobility and powerful commoners. So now we enter the pay up or else kind of stage. This is called a forced loan. Okay. Charles sends letters out September 1626. It's a forced loan. This is basically pay up or else. If you didn't send your money in, the Privy Council will be dealing with you. The Privy Council is the very tight group of the king's advisors. Basically, pay up or you're going to jail. About £250,000 comes in. This is not a threat you can ignore. Okay. There are other things that Charles does to show England that he is a divine right, absolute monarch. See, in England, you needed to have soldiers stationed all over the country. And now that we've attempted to attack Spain, it's possible that we maybe need some more soldiers down in the southeastern part of England where Spain might be coming. If they were to retaliatorily attack. Plus, we also need the soldiers down there so when we are ready to go to war, they're there so we can go to war. Well, they don't have military bases. They don't have barracks all over the place. What was traditionally done is the soldiers were billeted in taverns, inns, roadside motels, if you will, early holiday inns. Okay? And the king paid for the soldiers' room and board. He paid directly to the tavern. Can Charles afford this? No. So Charles says, well, you won't give me the money that I need. You'll provide what I would pay for. And so he orders that the soldiers be billeted in civilian homes. Yep. So tonight sometime, maybe around dinner time, Kate goes to the door, opens it up. Here's 4 soldiers with their guns. It's like, what are you guys doing here? We've been ordered to billet at this residence, but we don't have any extra rooms. We've been ordered to billet at this residence, but we don't have any. We've been ordered to billet at this residence, and they just come on in. They take your beds, they eat your food, they use all the hot water in the shower, and they're just living there. Oh, and here's the thing. Because they don't all live together, they don't meet, they don't drill, there's no officer with these 4 dudes, so how do you suppose they behave? Like animals, for the most part. They're undisciplined, they are not supervised, and they're underpaid. So they're going to kind of help themselves to whatever they want, including you, Kate. Oh, and soldiers, by the way, aren't subject to local law. So although rape may be illegal where you live, and theft may be illegal where you live, the military has to find out that they've done it, has to gather evidence against them, get people to testify against them. They have to be court-martialed under military law. How often do you think that happened? Yeah, like not that often. Okay, now Charles, just because he is a divine right absolute monarch doesn't mean that he's not a little evil. He uses this billeting against his political enemies. Tyler, you spoke out against the king in Parliament. So in your home, on your manor, well, all of your peasants are now going to be kicked out of their cottages, and in your manor house, an entire company will be billeted. That's nice. Enjoy. Yeah, all of your peasants are really happy that you spoke out in opposition to the king. How many is a company? A company is fairly small. I probably should have said a platoon, but those are modern numbers and sizes. I don't know what they would have had in 1628. There are, in the end, 76 guys who say, we will not pay. You can't make us. Charles has them imprisoned. What happens in our world today if you go to prison? You get a trial. You get a trial. No trial. Charles is not stupid. He understands that the courts would probably see the forced loan as highly illegal and refuse to uphold it, which would mean that these guys would go free, having gotten away with defying the king. And what would the people who had paid do? Want their money back, right? So if I never get them to trial, the courts can't tell me what I did is wrong, so go. And they're still getting punished, so I get to stay in jail. Ministers in the Church of England, which is led by whom? The king. Ministers are preaching now in their Sunday sermons that serving their prince, the king, is of more importance than whether or not they're actually obeying the letter of taxation laws. So the king now has the ministers, the religious ministers, acting a bit as propaganda ministers. Now in American history, I don't think we deal with Charles enough, because Charles, other than Charleston and having sent some colonies up, doesn't have a lot to do with American history. He's seen as British history. Except as Americans, what you have to understand is that the beginning of your history is British history. What has Charles done here? He's extorted from his people. He has imprisoned without trial. He has combined church and state, right? He set up quartering, where you force people to billet soldiers. Are these all issues that we as Americans address fairly early on? Yeah. Yeah. So Charles actually had a pretty good influence on us because it is the people of England who lived through this who they or their children or their grandchildren are here in the colonies when the same kind of stuff gets pulled, who remember the stories, etc. It all carries forward. So Charles I has a lot more to do with us than you tend to think. All right. La Rochelle, France. We got to spend a little more time with Louis XIII. Okay. Now remember, the point in Charles marrying Henrietta Maria was to get France to ally with England against Spain, right? But part of that marriage treaty said that England was going to extend toleration to Catholics, which England hadn't done. In fact, England had gone the other way. Now France is mad at England for that. But England had given France ships to use in the war against Spain, which England had then turned around and used against French Protestants, which England is mad about. So they're both mad at each other. Okay? In 1627, the year after Charles had summoned and then dismissed Parliament without any money, he decides to help the Protestants who are being besieged in La Rochelle. So he sends about 100 ships in June with about 6,000 soldiers over. Okay? The English land and they set up a siege outside town aimed at the French army. The whole goal is that the French Protestants are going to see this aid rise up out of religious unity and their own self-pride, join the British soldiers and drive back the French Catholic army that Louis has sent. That doesn't happen. And the British soldiers are left standing around kind of waiting for something to go down. Okay? In the time that they are there, Charles is only able to get the money to buy supplies to send to them once. They give up and board their ships and come back home on October 30th. So in June to October, they get one shipment of supplies. They're in pretty bad shape by the time they get back. About half of them won't make it back. Louis XIII is uber royally pissed that this has gone down. And he decides that he's going to show the British and the French Protestants a thing or two. And he orders his soldiers to set up a ring all around La Rochelle. No supplies will be coming in by land. And he has massive manpower go out into the harbor and build a dike. A dike is a wall of earth. No ships are sailing into the harbor. So what's getting into La Rochelle to feed the people? Nothing. Okay? So the British left on October 30th. Louis gives orders to shoot anyone trying to escape La Rochelle or coming out to attempt to forage for food. He essentially starves the town to death. The British left October 30th, 1627. On November 1st, a year later, in 1628, Louis XIII marches his army into La Rochelle triumphant. He showed those Protestants, do not defy the king. Because by that time, Cardinal Richelieu had done what?
Hadn't he completely outlawed strongholds by then?
No strongholds. He'd rescinded those parts of the Edict of Nantes. So La Rochelle shouldn't have been able to close its gates to the king. So, take that. Okay? Louis XIII is pretty much an absolute monarch. Okay, Charles had lost over half the troops he sent. He wants to keep fighting, but he's out of money. Yes?
Can you clarify which Louis it was?
13.
13?
Louis XIII. Louis XIII. I said Louis XIII the first time I said it. and then I just got shorter. Sorry. Charles needs money. So that means he's going to have to do what? He can't really call Parliament while 76 members of Parliament are sitting rotting in jail because they refuse to obey the forced loan. So now, after the embarrassment at Cadiz, after the embarrassment of begging for money, after the embarrassment of the French using British ships against Protestants, after the embarrassment of La Rochelle, he now has to let out the people that he'd thrown in jail and call Parliament and ask them for money. The smell of failure should be fully filling your sinuses now. Charles this time doesn't try the whole sheriff thing to eliminate his opposition. He understands that people are ticked. In fact, it's pretty clear that the forced loan had upset a lot of people, and his opposition in Parliament is even greater this election. Parliament starts out doing as the king had asked. They start discussing taxation about that long. And then what do? Anytime there's a group of you together and you're commonly upset about something, regardless of what needs to get done, what do? You talk about it, you start complaining, you start whining and moaning, right? Parliament does this. They complain about the forced loan, they complain about the billeting of troops, they complain about the wastage of money on poorly executed military endeavors. The complaints get bigger and bigger. And the House of Commons issues this document called the Petition of Right. It denounces the forced loan, any imprisonment without cause, and martial law. Now here's the shocker. Just because the House of Commons does something doesn't mean it matters. But the House of Lords also endorses this. The forced loan was a bit much even for the nobility. Okay. It's presented to the king. The king goes, oh, okay, and he consents to it. By consenting to it, he's saying no more imprisonment without cause, no more forced loans, no more martial law. Rule by the military. Charles agrees to these things in good conscience because he is a divine right absolute monarch. And as such, he is subject only to God, not the laws of man. So in his mind, he's actually thinking, these fools think that this matters to me. It's not even a crossing the fingers thing. He just knows he's above this, and he doesn't get why they don't get it. Okay?
But hasn't he lost so much power to Parliament that he's no longer...
James had given up power. Charles has fought them all the way. Anytime they wanted to take any power away from him, he sent them home without dinner. Okay? Once he has agreed to the Petition of Right, Parliament finally votes on taxation. They grant him a little bit of taxation, but they still are refusing to give him tonnage and poundage for life, which is what he wants. Okay? So he ends this session of Parliament while still insisting that he has the right to collect tonnage and poundage for as long as he rules.
What's stopping him collecting? Is Parliament saying no?
Well, he can collect it, but then every time he does, people complain because it hasn't been granted by Parliament. So Parliament again. Buckingham is murdered in 1628. Bet nobody saw that coming, right? King's favorite. Parliament is convened in 1629. The minute it's convened, someone brings up, like literally the minute it's convened, gavel, call to order. The king is breaking the Petition of Right. He said he'd obey it, and he's not. And he's been collecting tonnage and poundage, and he shouldn't be because he said he was cool with the Petition of Right. In particular, there's one member of Parliament who's had his goods impounded by the king because he refused to pay tonnage and poundage. So Charles dismisses Parliament again. Yep. It's like, gavel. King's violating the petition of right. Charles gets wind of this. Go home. But I haven't even checked into my hotel yet. I go home. So Charles will rule for 11 years without calling Parliament. In order to accomplish that, he has to get the money thing under control. And one of the best ways to stop needing so much money is to stop spending so much money. So he makes peace with France in 1629. He makes peace with Spain in 1630. He has his lawyers go through the books, and they look up really ancient laws that haven't been enforced in so long that provide him with some sources of revenue. He starts enforcing taxes that haven't been enforced forever. Okay, look it up. Not in our realm of time here. There's some really interesting stuff though. He makes people mad by making some changes within the Church of England. And then he makes the Irish mad by trying to enforce laws there that had never been enforced. They'd been on the books, but they had never been enforced. Never before had someone said to the Irish, no, you can't do that. And Charles is. And they're ticked. So, Charles eventually is forced to summon Parliament. He can only make it so far on so little. This Parliament is known as the Long Parliament. They are in session for a long time. 13 years, I think. Charles tries to dismiss them. And they are like a 2-year-old who does not want to be fed. They won't go. He dismisses them repeatedly. And they won't go. Okay? Have you ever seen a toddler sit on a parent's foot and wrap its arms and legs around the leg and like, no, God, this is Parliament. Okay, this is the Long Parliament. They are not about to let Charles get away with his shenanigans. Shenanigans. One of the first things they do, yes?
How many times total, how many times did he dismiss him and have him come back?
Oh, I used to know that. No. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. I think it may be it's in the nearly double digits, 7, 8. It's a lot. I haven't gone through all of them. You can take an entire college semester on the Stuarts, because it is such a messed up time in English history and such a changing time, and lots of stuff that has implications for our modern world. First thing the Long Parliament does is issue the Grand Remonstrance. Do you know what a remonstrance is? It's like a reprimand. The Grand Remonstrance is a list of everything the king has done wrong. This does not fit on your average Post-it note. It's called the Grand Remonstrance for a reason, yeah. It is a little longish. This also gets to the king, and the king is made to read it. The king is made to acknowledge it, which he does without problem because divine right. Only God can judge me, you fools.
When does the divine right thing go away?
You're about to find out. You're about to find out when it goes away. Charles refuses to be reprimanded. And ultimately, civil war results. I could spend 3 days telling you how we get from the Grand Remonstrance to civil war, and then war happens. ... Okay? The Civil War in England is fought by two groups, the Parliamentarians and the Royalists. Those are the two sides. The Parliamentarians are in opposition to the king, and the Royalists support him. as you could tell by royalists. If you miss the question about who's on which side and who supports whom, duh. Just duh. Royalists. They have nicknames, though. The parliamentarians are also called Roundheads because it was the Puritan style of the day to wear a big poofy bowl cut. Like bowl cut and then kind of shaved beneath that. It's a great look. I encourage it. Dare ya? Ladies, not for you. Just the fellas. Just for the fellas. Okay? The king's soldiers, the nobility fighting on his side, are known as the Cavaliers. Okay? The Cavaliers and the Roundheads. What Parliament decides is that it needs to rule by oligarchy. It's a small group. A small group. Parliament's too big to make all the day-to-day decisions, so they need a small group who can get through the fighting of the war. Like a mini parliament. They charge Charles with treason. They're like, dude, the grand remonstrance, we tried to tell you what you're doing wrong. By refusing to do these things, by going on and acting on your own, you have committed treason against your country. They charge him with this, and he is subject now to arrest. He is arrested. He is put on trial in front of the House of Lords. You're supposed to see a jury of your peers. Well, of course, he's a divine right absolute monarch, and we couldn't get God to come down and judge him. So the Lords are the best we can do. He is found guilty of treason and is beheaded. It's a French axeman to come over and lop his top off, as it were, because they're the best axemen, and if you can afford them, that's what you want. One chop and done. So, now, wait. Just Oliver Cromwell, not Lord Protector. Oliver Cromwell is the guy who leads the parliamentarian army. He doesn't have a military background or anything, but he leads the parliamentarian army and wins the Civil War. Parliament continues to elevate him in importance to the point at which the monarchy is abolished. There will never again be a king of England. Done. No more monarchy. Monarchy's terrible. It's bad. Look at what the crazy things kings do. And they go on, and eventually Oliver Cromwell has gained such prominence that Parliament gives him the title Lord Protector of England, Oliver Cromwell. And he's like, oh, you guys, this is too much. And then they say, hey, how about if you become Lord Protector of England for life? And he's like, no, really, I shouldn't. Okay. And then they're like, hey, how about if we make your son the next Lord Protector of England when you die? What's going on here? Royalty with a different name. Oh. People like familiar. They like comfortable. Right? Well, his son, I think it's Robert, doesn't do well. And we'll start with the restoration when you start working on your notes.